Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and this week I have the privilege to sit down with Manny Cancel. Manny is a senior vice president at NERC and the CEO of the Electricity ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center. Manny's going to give a little bit of background on those issues, and obviously we're going to go deep into grid security, I think an issue that's top of mind for everyone. Manny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Frank, thanks for having us. Really appreciate being here.
And the important work you do, I would love to start with, I know most of our viewers and listeners are familiar with the Electricity ISAC, but they may not have all the background. Thought I'd start with sort of that PSA and to give a little bit of background. What is the ISAC? Who does it serve? How long has it been around? And anything else you think our viewers should hear?
Sure, thanks for that. Happy to provide that background. So the ISAC's actually been around for 25 years. This was our 25th anniversary year this year.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, right? So, but we've seen the ISAC grow tremendously in those 25 years. So we are a stakeholder organization for the electricity sector, 1,800 members. Most of them are utilities across the United States and Canada. Mm-hmm. We do have about 250 government partners and technology partners that are part of the ISAC, and really, people that are stakeholders in the ecosystem here that all have a vested interest in keeping the grid secure. Have a variety, of utilities, obviously the investor-owned utilities, large public power, and small utilities like municipally run co-ops and rural cooperatives and things like that. So we have a diversity of utilities that we need to serve, as well as our partners in the federal government, both in the U.S. and Canada. And I always say this: it's our responsibility to help and support the equities of all those stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So that's the ISAC. The one other thing I'll say, we are part of NERC, but we have no compliance management or enforcement functions. It is strictly a security organization that is really focused on sharing and making sure the industry is sensitized to the security risk.
Awesome. So Manny, you've been at the helm for 4 years, and from the day you came in to today, it's been a busy 4 years, I would proffer to say. And let's start with a little question sort of on the threat landscape. And you've had Volt Typhoon, you've had an epidemic of ransomware. How has the sector sort of changed its security posture to deal with the rapidly changing threat?
Yeah, so couldn't agree more. The posture is complex, at a pace that we've never seen before in terms of both complexity and velocity, and arguably overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so you've seen the industry continue to focus on how it continues to enhance its capabilities going forward. And, I always like to note this is not an issue that the electricity industry just woke up to, right?
Exactly.
We've been paying attention to security risks for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But as you point out, there's always a need to sort of look at our capabilities, continue to refine our capabilities, think about how we are addressing new things like new technologies like AI and things like that. So, those are the challenges that I think are in front of us as we go forward.
And I'm going to pull on the new technology and AI and everything else that's both shiny and real in a second. But one thing that I've noticed, and disagree with me, I have a hard time divorcing cyber from geopolitics. If something's popping somewhere and going boom in the middle of the night, it probably has a cyber nexus to it. And if it doesn't, it had a cyber role in one way, shape, or form or another. How do you feel sort of and we'll start with the big bear and the big dragon, China and Russia. Are we getting to the point where, and I long argued that industry's on the front lines, but they never went into business thinking they had to defend themselves against nation states. Are we starting to get to an equilibrium there?
I don't know if we're at an equilibrium, but, you make, a great point, right? The threat has really become so much more complicated because of the geopolitical tensions that are going out throughout the world. So pick your part of the world: Southeast Asia, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East. There's so many areas, right? And I agree with you. When you hear about a cyber issue, you have to really ask, is this connected to a nation state or a political adversary? So that's something that we keep in mind when we try to, evaluate as we do our analysis as we go forward. What you said is absolutely true. It's kind of not a fair fight, right? Corporations were not designed to fight nation states, right? So this is why it's critical that we continue to work with, our federal partners and state and local partners to, one, sensitize them to the issue, to look for bad behavior, and the adversaries are getting much better at hiding that, being stealthy, being persistent, and that's what makes this challenge all the more, hard to address. But nonetheless, we keep, looking at these things.
And I don't want to lead the witness, but I would say that cooperation has improved exponentially, in large part because the bad guy has a vote. We have no choice. But is that fair?
Yeah, I think since I've been in the industry, which is over 40 years,
including CIO of Con Ed,
right? Including as a CIO in a big city, the cooperation, the partnership between the industry and government is really quite robust, right? And something, quite honestly, that is just table stakes. It has to continue as we go forward. That's how we're going to stay ahead of this.
You mentioned there's a difference between sort of the Duke Energies and the Southern companies and some of the co-ops. How do we sort of square that circle?
Yeah, that's a challenge, right? The big guys have mature programs, a lot of resources.
And probably the gold standard in the cyber business.
Yes, arguably. And they're big targets, though, too, right?
Absolutely, for a reason. Exactly.
They're big targets for a reason, but that doesn't mean we should ignore some of the smaller players here who also serve as, critical businesses, critical defense infrastructure are vital to the success of the economy here and the lifestyle that we have. So really what we try to do is help. And by that, I mean, we curate products and services for the different audiences that we deal with, right? And we don't dumb things down, but we make things more consumable and digestible for maybe... And usable, right, for an organization. So look here, not necessarily here. Focus on this. When we ring the bell, we try to ring the bell and really make sure that people are paying attention. The other thing that's unique to the electricity industry, and I think it's because we're not competing against each other, we do share quite a bit. We share information, not only with the threat landscape, but this is concept that we've extended from storm restoration, which is called mutual aid. And so there is a cyber mutual aid program in the electricity industry here in the United States, where we have developed the requisite legal documentations and NDAs that would allow companies to pick up the phone and call somebody during a bad period and get assistance. And the good thing about this is, unlike a storm where you have to mobilize crews and trucks, people can work from wherever they're working and work on the issue too. And that is a unique program to our industry.
Absolutely, and essential, and unfortunately we have a lot of scar tissue and lessons learned from response recovery and restoration along those lines. You brought up AI, and you're seeing massive growth in the utilities with data centers and AI just in terms of customers and the like, but how has that changed the industry? And I'm not asking you to look into a crystal ball, but what does it mean kind of going forward?
Yeah, just from an operational perspective, the concern with AI is the impact on reliability, right? You have this proliferation of data centers and this growth in load, which is great for the economy and the utilities, but at the same time, we have to be able to serve that load, and it cannot impact the reliability of the system. And so, the need to site more generation, to do this in a well-engineered way that we don't put the system at risk. Now, from a cyber perspective, I think there's a lot of benefits and there's risks associated with AI, right? AI will make hacking easier, faster, right? We saw some of this during the recent political campaigns that have gone on here, the spread of disinformation and other, sophisticated techniques. At the same time, I think it'll make finding the bad guys a little easier, right? We'll learn about what they're doing, and especially for things that are persistent and stealthy, like Volt Typhoon or Salt Typhoon. over time we'll learn, the techniques that they're using, and we'll be able to adapt our tools to help detect and mitigate against those risks.
I'm glad you brought up Salt Typhoon as well, and we have lots of typhoons popping around the world right now, and the Microsoft's names for some of these incidents. Volt Typhoon, I think, was a big eye-opener in terms of there was no value for collection. This was purely to be able to penetrate the system in the event of a crisis, take advantage of that. Salt Typhoon, on the other hand, is another massive espionage sort of campaign. How are you cooperating with the telecommunications sector and some of the information sharing and analysis centers there?
Yeah, so we meet on a monthly basis with all the critical infrastructure ISACs, right? And then through other venues, there's a lot of coordination. I personally coordinate with my peers at the Telecommunications ISAC, Financial Services ISAC, and through various
FS ISAC was the first ISAC. Were you the second, or
I don't know. I don't know the order, but Steve Silberman at the FS ISAC is a longtime colleague. Know him from New York City, and
absolutely,
so
has a lot of New York roots.
There's a lot of New York roots, right? But again, that collaboration, just like our collaboration with the government, is critical. Right. For information sharing, for the sharing of best practices. When Russia initially invaded Ukraine, we activated what we call a playbook, right, which gets us involved with the other critical infrastructure ISACs. And it was interesting to learn from the other industries that had assets in Ukraine or in Europe, the impact that was going on there that we may not see here in the United States, right? So that just underscores the value of these partnerships.
And I might note, and again, disagree with me, but a lot of the lessons we can glean from hotspots around the world could be a movie coming to a theater near you in the United States. So it is important to share, learn, and most importantly, then protect in terms of what we're learning. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely. Again, it's not unreasonable to think that what we're seeing in other parts of the world could occur here. And again, when the invasion of Ukraine occurred, one of the things we did is we went back to the industry and we said, look, here's what happened in 2015, 2016. This could happen again. But again, all these attacks sort of provide an opportunity to sort of look back and see what could the impact be here.
And learn, because the reality is when we have a crisis, that's when I see the public and the private sector come together in a very powerful and strong way. I don't necessarily see that on an everyday environment. I'm not sure we need to, but learning from that, I think is essential. Last year when I looked at the sector, there seemed to be a whole lot of physical attacks and kinetic attacks and rifles and the like domestically, and we all know there have been some significant incidents in the past in California and elsewhere. Anything we can be learning from that? And I dare bring this up now. Drones are front and center and on the top of everyone's mind this week in terms of UAS. What does that mean for the landscape and sort of the convergence of physical and cyber?
Yeah, there's certainly been an uptick in physical security activities. And again, something, and I think it's important to note, we do not just track physical cybersecurity.
Yep.
We focus on physical security and have a whole team focus on that. Look, the bottom line here is that activists, extremists, and we haven't seen any evidence of this, but nation states too, potentially, all possess that capability. And they know physically attacking critical infrastructure is just another arrow in the quiver, right?
And just look at Ukraine. I mean,
right.
Kinetic attacks, cyber
infrastructure. So after the shootings in Moore County in December of 2022, we took a much more focused analysis of physical security incidents, right? So the punchline is they are increasing, right? People know that there are assets out there. They know that there's a way to potentially impact the grid by attacking these assets. The overwhelming majority of these attacks are not consequential, meaning that they don't cause operational impact to the grid, what we call grid impacting incidents, right? The 3% that do put the grid into an operating contingency or cause an outage, right? So we have to, again, remain focused, right? Now, the critical infrastructure standards, the CIP standards, offer and proffer some suggestions for protecting bulk power assets. So these are bulk power, high voltage transmission substations, not necessarily distribution. But there's an opportunity to sort of look at what we're doing on the bulk power side and thinking about how do you extend that to other assets.
You open up another line of questioning, and not sure how deep you want to go here, but supply chain issues are pretty significant. And whether it's UAS drones in terms of the DJI issue, ET could be phoning home, and I know that they've been deployed all throughout the United States, including by critical infrastructure owner-operators, as well as sort of bulk power and the need, if a crisis were to emerge, are we front and center and first on the list is a question. And it takes time. I think people don't realize you don't just snap a finger and boom, you're going to get a transformer online. But to come from a black start to be able to start again, what are your thoughts around that issue?
I could probably spend the rest of the day talking about supply chain, not only on the physical asset side like transformers, but also certainly software supply chain is a challenge. Again, something that we continue to look at. There's been a focus, particularly on the distribution side, to increase, our supply and capacity. Probably more needs to be done from a manufacturing perspective there, but making some progress there. Drones, again, I don't know that I answered your question right out of the box there, but again, we're seeing a proliferation of the use of drones. I think the challenge with drones is that there are legitimate use cases, and then there are malicious use cases, and finding out, the difference and then taking actions against that. So again,
not all drones are created equal either.
Not all drones are created equal, and then when you inject the supply chain issue there, what are foreign manufactured drones? What risks do they bring, right? How do we protect against that? So I think a lot more to go. And I think probably if I had to call out, there are several priorities, but an opportunity to work more closely with federal agencies, I think we've got to collaborate on that, quite a bit.
And again, there are lessons to be gleaned overseas in terms of UAS and conflict and straight up warfare that have significant implications. And I think you touched on this, but on the manufacturing and advanced manufacturing side, I again don't want to lead the witness too much, but we got to bring some of that onshore, some of that, or at least friendshore some of that, so we're not dependent upon countries that are countries of potential concern or in the orbit of countries of potential concern.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the way I look at it is, what do we have to do to really buy down the risk, right?
Boom. That's the right
that's the focus that we have to take.
Well said. Now, New Yorker, Mets or Yankees?
I am a Mets fan.
Me too. Okay. So I'm Islanders, Mets, Jets, Islanders. So maybe you feel my
kindred
pain
spirits
over all
there.
these years. So it's been a tough few years, although our Mets will be back. But Jets, maybe. But I bring that up because Yogi Berra once said the future ain't what it used to be. So what do we sort of look at? And Yankees, unfortunately, but a great American. Sort of, how do we get ahead of some of this risk? And the reason I ask this is we're very good at backfilling. We tend to march into the future backwards, looking in our rear view mirrors and addressing what we just saw. And of course we need to do that. But how do we look forward?
Yeah, I think, looking deliberately at supply chain, CISA has put out a lot of recommendations like secure by design, right? I don't think anybody
and cyber-informed engineering.
Cyber-informed engineering,
absolutely,
right? Yep. And those have to become more than buzzwords, and I think they are. But how do we practically enable that? And again, you're not going to wave a wand and every piece of software is going to be secure by design. But the software that we all use, or the software that is critical to running a data center or an electric grid, that really has to be much more secure, right? I think at the same time, we have to recognize the fact that, because we've seen it, that things will happen. And how do we engineer our systems to be more resilient, right? Whether it's from a physical attack or a cyber attack, right? So something may go down, but how do we get it back up? Or how do we back it up quickly and switch over to something else? I think there are opportunities, again, not to do it ubiquitously, but there are opportunities to sort of focus on that as well.
Focus. Yeah. And I do think you touched on the word and said resilience is the outcome. I think in a worst case scenario, at least we hope we can bounce back, if not bounce forward.
Right.
And I think we're never going to be able to say we can protect everything everywhere all the time from every perpetrator and every modality of attack. That's
correct.
A fool's errand.
That's right.
So,
right.
Going deeper on the ISAC and the electricity ISAC, how would you compare, contrast, and I'm not asking you to grade, even though we're a university, but compare information sharing, what differentiates maybe the E-ISAC from other ISACs, and just your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think one is the community. We have a history of sharing, and I mentioned before, we don't necessarily compete with each other. The other thing is that the ISAC is walled off from its compliance function at NERC, right?
Important.
That's very important. We wouldn't be in business very long.
Exactly.
Right. So I think we try to remind people that all the time. The other thing, it's not, and I firmly believe this, not just about sharing widgets. You don't have to contact the ISAC. We're happy if you do that every time you get a phishing attack. But it's important to contact us when you see evidence of a severe attack, a ransomware attack, or evidence of a nation-state threat actor, or something you just can't explain, right? Where you see, significant impact or potential impact. We've got to ring that bell fast so we can sensitize the industry.
And to pull that thread a little further, it's also sort of the canary in the coal mine. Others are going to be facing similar. Don't think they're just going after. Sometimes maybe it is very discriminate, but in large part, it's one piece of the puzzle that I think industry as a whole has a need to know, right? That's the argument?
That's the argument, right? I think there's a much broader acceptance of the fact that this may not just be me. It could be the rest of the sector, or it could be other critical infrastructure sectors, right?
Exactly.
Right. And connecting the dots between, you mentioned convergence, right? Is a physical attack a precursor to a cyber attack, or vice versa?
Or vice versa, yeah.
Right. Those are things we need to think about.
CRISP, sort of the Visa workshops, obviously GridEx. Share a little bit about 3 of your flagship programs and any others I'm forgetting.
Yeah, look, CRISP is a bespoke program, a great example of the partnership between the federal government and the sector. It's a sensor program that looks for malicious behavior. It's been around for 10 years. I could cite
national labs
that are involved. I think there's an opportunity to increase and enhance the technology, also increase participation in the program. Not that these sensors have to be on everything or everybody, but we can strategically do this and probably expand it to other sectors as well too. As far as the Visa and other security workshops, really focused on enhancing the awareness around physical security threats. And in the Visa workshops, what we like about them is that we really don't do anything. We just facilitate the conversation, and it helps our members think about sort of the no regrets, lower cost moves that they could take to affect their resiliency. GridEx, I've been involved in GridEx, every single GridEx, either as a player, and now I get to throw the party.
Boom.
But again, an incredibly effective, and for people that are not familiar, it is the largest grid security exercise in North America and arguably the world. We increasingly get more and more of our members to participate. It is 2 days of what we call distributed play.
You spend time in that funny island in Long Island?
That's right. That's right.
Go.
But we spend time where people can exercise, or organizations can exercise their response plans. And then we culminate it with what we call the executive tabletop here in Washington, where we bring together the CEOs of the industry, both in the U.S. and Canada, and members of the governments there, and quite robust conversations that and always something comes out of it. I mentioned cyber mutual assistance. That came out of a GridEx.
Oh, awesome.
Increased collaboration with other critical infrastructure sectors came out of GridEx, right? So we look forward to more of that as we continue.
So the E-ISAC is who brings that group together after for lessons learned and hot washes, and more importantly, to get stakeholder support to actually do something about it.
Right. You know, we run the exercise, we provide the scenario, we facilitate the executive tabletop, we put together an after-action review. Anybody that's interested in seeing the after-action reviews can go to NERC.com.
Awesome.
And take a look at it. And each year or each exercise, the exercises not only become more robust, but the follow-up is more robust.
And that's where it matters, right? That's where the
really
rubber
where it
hits the
matters.
road.
Right.
You know, you mentioned a couple of things that building trust, credibility, and confidence with your constituents, and in this case, your stakeholder community, which is diverse. Again, they don't all look the same. How do you do that? And I know that's sort of a open-ended question, but it takes years to build trust. It takes minutes to lose trust. And you mentioned a couple of things that if you did have sort of that regulatory hammer, maybe you wouldn't be able to instill the confidence and trust in the community. What are some of the other sort of ingredients to success here?
Well, you know, one, I think it's may sound a little hokey, but it's just regular engagement, right? It's communication.
Actually, it's all
we are a stakeholder organization, so we're only as good as how they feel about us, right? And so, you know, I make sure that I engage regularly with CISOs in the industry, across the industry. Again, our partners in the government, you know, I have regular communications with folks at FERC and DOE and DHS, just to maintain that continuity. We support them. You know, I think it's important that we show that we are supporting what industry is trying to do and what the government is trying to do, right? It's not that we have a horse in the race, but, you know, it's important that we stay aligned on these things, right? So, and some of that is, you know, the old-fashioned way. You know, I travel a lot, going to see folks and having these discussions, having discussions like this, and I think it's important in terms of our relationships.
And I don't find that hokey at all. At the end of the day, don't expect to come to game day if you're not practicing and making mistakes on the practice field every day and just engaging. So I do think when you look at the stakeholders, both in terms of scale, scope, and where they are, it needs to have that reason, that tissue to sort of like, if you want to get bigger, you got to go to the gym. You got to do the reps.
That's right. That's right.
And at the end of the day, the reps are what matter. And you certainly don't want to be exchanging business cards when the bomb goes off or something bad happens. You know, we talked a little bit about AI and what that could mean. I'm not going to bring in the whole quantum discussion, but along the lines in terms of advancements in technology, what are some of the positives you think we can see out of this? And maybe put on your hat as when you were CIO of Con Ed. I mean, yes, obviously there's a red and a blue. It's a double-edged sword. I tend to think that historically the initiative remains with the attacker, but I think the defender, blue, does have some potential huge value if it knows how to employ and deploy some of these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about AI in the context of security, but think about it in the context of operations. How do I switch to alternative generation sources?
Exactly.
How do I optimize the status of the grid? How do I better inform my asset management program? On a resource perspective, where do I deploy crews and resources? Weather, you know, we can use AI to, again, predict more about what weather will do, right? And how it'll affect the grid, and then maybe, you know, take preemptive actions there too. So look,
are you starting to see that with AI being a driver and an enabler?
Yeah, I absolutely.
Good.
I think that's where the sector is going to, you know, invest its money to sort of do that, right?
So when we talk about critical infrastructure, the government has defined 16 sectors. I would argue the grid and electricity is at the very top of the list. Without power, it doesn't matter what else.
Yeah, Tom Fanning used to say, I think he might have said it on one of these podcasts, electricity is 7% of GDP, but it's the first 7%.
It is the first 7%.
Electricity,
Well said. But what some don't realize is you need water running for the sector to be able to stay up and running. Let's talk about sort of some of the interdependency and what you think the sector and the E-ISAC, and you touched on this, but more that could potentially happen if needed with some of your colleagues across the other ISACs and then industry.
Yeah, look, my comment wasn't meant to criticize any sector here. They're all important, right? And our reliance on water, on telecommunications, right? Critical that we have telecommunications, particularly when we're trying to restore parts of the grid, right? And as we've said, they need electricity to operate their systems too. So again, having discussions about how we collectively increase our resilience is very important. And we've been having some of the discussions. The most recent hurricanes that hit the southeast, again, showed us that there are still opportunities to increase how we collaborate and affect resilience in both those sectors.
Do you see a time and point where everyone's getting a similar matrix across the critical infrastructures to glean? And obviously, some will be of less and more interest to certain sectors, but when I had the privilege to work for President Bush, right after 9/11, he would get a separate foreign and domestic intelligence snapshot until he said, hey, I need these two to come together. Do you see that happening in the critical infrastructure
I do
space?
see it happening. I think there's probably opportunities for it to happen. Again, not necessarily wait for the bad thing to happen, but to do that. But through venues like the JCDC at DHS and other venues, I think you're starting to see a sharing of information and bringing the risk and looking at it from that perspective.
Especially run-up of events, right?
That's right. A run-up of events is critical. But I think obviously there's more to do. In the energy sector, we have this concept of the ETAC, Energy Threat Analysis Center.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Which really is, again, a great forum for discussing the threats. Obviously more in the context of electricity, but stepping back and then deciding what do we tell the industry about, and what do we tell other industries too?
Exactly,
because that's a big part of it, right?
What advice would you have for the next generation of leaders in the space of securing the grid?
Yeah, don't give up, right? I know it's easy to sort of get demoralized by all these things, but we have a track record of being able to do this, and I fully expect that we'll continue to do this. I think I said it before, we have to design a grid that hopefully can prevent these things or at least detect them, but we also have to design something that can recover faster, right? Boom. And I think, that's the opportunity. And, 40 plus years ago when I joined the industry, it was kind of a staid industry, right? Very slow to change. Well, that's flipped on its ear, right? It's arguably a really cool industry to work in right now. And I think there's lots of opportunities. It
is a cool industry. It's leading. And I'm going to, before I ask my last question, I forgot to ask around OT, which I think is bread and butter of the utilities. Do you feel that community is rising because, again, I have a hard time differentiating today, at least from the bad guys' perspective, IT and OT, physical and cyber. But any words of wisdom around that?
It's definitely rising, and I think, again, provides an opportunity to, again, thinking about how we architect these systems, protect them, and make them more resilient. Your point about the convergence of IT and OT, most of the OT attacks come through IT, right? So, it's important to keep that conversation going and understand that, right? We've seen from the ransomware attacks where the adversaries weren't necessarily targeting the OT, but they might as well have been, because in many cases, the OT got shut down, right? So, I think that's the way we need to look at it, that you can't completely separate IT from OT and vice versa.
And obviously they have unique differentiators, but at the end of the day, if OT systems are down, that normally means you have kinetic physical impact,
right,
which could actually lead to loss of life.
That's right.
Public health and safety and the like. Manny, what questions didn't I ask that I should have?
Geez, there's a lot to go through. About resources, how do we keep
policy without resources is rhetoric? Yeah.
I think how do we keep an adequate supply of resources, a pipeline of resources. You know, there are a lot of
No pun
initiatives.
intended.
Yeah, that's right. No pun intended. But, you know, certainly like institutions like this that are really focused on doing that, you know, helping to create the next generation of cyber or security leaders. I think that's really important as we go forward.
Manny, thank you for your service, a true veteran in this space for so many years, and thank you for all you're doing to advance the ball, keep our lights on, and keep fighting the good fight. I really appreciate it. I figuratively and literally have a token of our appreciation here, our
Thanks
coin,
so
and
much.
just wanted to say thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And for our viewers, stay tuned. I wanted to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or whatever it is you may celebrate. We'll be back in the new year. Onward and upward. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.